Hi everyone, welcome to my channel where I talk about movies, including recent Blu-ray releases. And today I want to talk about a recent Criterion release, and this is two films by Marguerite Duras, India Song and Baxter, Vera Baxter. And today I'm going to talk about India Song, which was from 1975, starring Delphine, Seyrig, and Michael Lonsdale, Mathieu Carrière. And I have to say right off the bat that this is a very challenging film. This is an experimental film, narratively speaking. It's very oblique, elliptical. It's very much part of the 60s and 70s, where directors are playing around with form and how to tell stories differently. So it's basically a European art film, but of its own subgenre. Marguerite Duras made films. Nobody else made films like her. And we soon the film opens in what is a very luxuriously appointed drawing room of what we soon learn to be the French embassy in Calcutta, 1937. And we see characters walk through this drawing room. And the drawing room includes a ceiling to floor mirror, great big mirror, and we see much of the action, there's very little action in the movie, but much of the performance, the presence of the actors. Sometimes we see them in kind of double vision. We see them in the foreground and in the mirror image, and we also see characters like they sort of emerge from the mirror into the foreground, as well as disappear from the foreground into the mirror. And it is beautifully done. So there's no sound, there's no dialogue in this movie. And you wonder with these great actors, you learn very quickly, aren't these people ever going to speak to each other? And they don't, even in the sense that they're not silently mouthing words. They pose, they look at each other. They move through this space of the drawing room and some of the exteriors and a few other interiors. They move as if sleepwalking, as if they were sleepwalking. They move silently, very precisely choreographed. But we do have a soundtrack. We have music. A fantastic music score that both comments and then sometimes it's sort of dissonant with as to the movement of the actors. It involves like folk songs and Beethoven music, and it's simply amazing. And they actually the music was filmed or was recorded before the filming, so they played the music and even some of the text. There is a text. There is a narration of sorts where two women are talking about the events that happened to these characters that we see sleepwalking through this mansion, and they're looking at them from the past tense. Events have happened. They're trying to figure them out as we, the audience, tries to figure out what exactly happened. Because despite all this artsiness, as far as the approach to the film, this is involving a very messy story. It's a story about infidelity. It's a story about suicide. It's a story about madness, despair. It's a story which the narrators often refer to as the disease is the leprosy of the heart. Now I got to admit, I struggled figuring out who the characters were, what the relationships between them, what actually happened, and it can be confusing. In fact, I read some reviews that got the plot wrong. Now, I know that modern day audiences hate spoilers, but I would think I would have benefited from this film if I actually had read a synopsis beforehand. Because even though the story is important, I got distracted by trying to figure it out, but the real importance is listening to it unfold, watching it unfold on screen. Now, Marguerite Duras was a novelist, a screenwriter, she wrote plays, If you've ever seen Hiroshima Mon Amour, directed by Alain Resnais, she wrote the screenplay for that film, and she wrote other screenplays as well, but she desired to direct, even though she liked Hiroshima. There were other films made by other directors that she was unsatisfied with. So in the 60s, she started making her own films of her screenplays. She actually made 19 films in total. And her novels, I've read a couple of her novels, and they're similarly challenging, but they're an experience. Like when I finished watching India Song, even though I was certainly challenged, my level of perception was certainly challenged here. I ended it with a kind of feeling of, boy, that was an experience, which I also got when I read Duras's novels, which are similarly challenging. They have a certain rather odd satisfaction to them. And if you want to read a novel by Duras, The Ravishing of Lonsdale, I would really recommend that film or that book, because you get a sense. So I knew a little bit of what I was getting into when I began watching this film. But I think I would have appreciated the film a lot more had I known what these relationships were. That might not be the same for everybody. If you want a puzzle to try to figure out what exactly has happened to these characters, then the synopsis probably wouldn't be that helpful to you. But what really sticks with you with Duras is the sense of romantic despair. I mean, she is both her novels and her films, and she wrote a very famous best-selling novel when she was only 17 years old called The Lover, big sensation, and it was autobiographical, depicting the love affair that she had when she was 15 years old with a much older Asian man, and her childhood was spent with her parents, who I think were teachers in the French colonial part of Asia, which would have been Vietnam, Laos, and she made many trips to India. So even though this film is supposedly set in India, it's an imaginary India. This is filmed in the Chateau Rothschild outside Paris, and that was a magnificent but decaying mansion. In the 1970s, it was occupied as a barrack. It was used as a barracks by the Nazis during World War II, during the occupation of France, and the Rothschilds never moved back into it. So it has. The film has very much also a sense of being 1937. That we are, especially at the end of the film, it's made explicit that we are sort of watching a kind of dirge for what was to be the oncoming cataclysm of World War II, and for Duras herself, because her husband, she had moved as an adult to Paris, and her husband was in Dachau. He survived, and she joined the resistance, and then after the war, she nursed him back to health, but it was obviously a big, huge, traumatic event for Duras, much as her childhood inspired some of her early fiction. So we get this sort of sense of a world that's crumbling away, a colonial world crumbling away, and a society that has something at the heart of it that identified in the movie as leprosy. So in that way, the movie somewhat reminds me of The Rules of the Game, which Jean Renoir made in 1939, from a more comic, tragic viewpoint, and from the viewpoint that he didn't know at the time that the cataclysm had begun, but it was sort of like a portrait of a society in which that was crumbling away, an aristocracy that was crumbling away, a way of life. So Renoir's view is somewhat comic tragedy, and Duras's viewpoint is more a kind of romantic despair. A very, very, like I say, a movie, when I was done with it, it was like, wow, that was an experience, but what did I experience exactly here? So tomorrow, or in the next day or two, I'll be, this was take one of this two by Marguerite Duras. Take two will be Baxter, Vera Baxter, in a couple of days. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.